Gentry Maddox turned his pickup truck onto the gravel road that led to his dead brother's house. 2 months had passed since Thorne's funeral, and the Tennessee heat made everything shimmer like a bad dream. The farmhouse looked smaller than he remembered, paint peeling from the shutters, weeds choking the flower beds that Thorne used to tend. He parked beside the rusted mailbox and cut the engine. The silence pressed against his ears. No kids playing in the yard. No sound of Thorne's laugh carrying from the workshop. Just the buzz of cicadas and the weight of unfinished business. The front door opened before he could knock. Savina stood in the doorway, her blonde hair pulled back tight, wearing a black dress that looked too expensive for a grieving widow in rural Tennessee. Her makeup was perfect, not a trace of tears or sleepless nights. Gentry. Her voice held no warmth. You could have called first. I did call. 3 times. He stepped onto the porch, noting how she didn't move aside to let him in. Left messages, too. I've been busy with arrangements. Insurance paperwork. You know how it is. She glanced over his shoulder toward the road, as if checking to see if anyone else was with him, that he knew exactly how it was. Savina had always been quick to count money, especially when it wasn't hers to begin with. Even at the funeral, she'd spent more time talking to the insurance adjuster than comforting her daughters. While other family members shared memories of Thorne, she'd been in the parking lot discussing claim procedures and payout timelines. Busy enough to ignore family, Gentry said, studying her face for any sign of genuine grief. He found none. I'm here for Thorne's tools. We talked about this at the service. Did we? She tilted her head, playing dumb. I don't remember that conversation. Maybe your grief made you forget. Gentry kept his voice level, but his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Thorne promised me his woodworking set when he was done with it. Guess he's done now. Savina's mouth tightened, the first crack in her composed facade. Those tools are valuable. Part of the estate. I can't just give away property that belongs to the girls now. Funny how you're suddenly concerned about what belongs to the girls. Gentry pulled out his phone. Thorne and I shook hands on it 3 years ago, in front of witnesses. Pete Morrison was there. So was Bill Crawford from the hardware store. I can call them if you need someone to refresh your memory. The threat worked. Savina knew Pete and Bill would remember the conversation, and she didn't want witnesses questioning her version of events. She stepped back, her composure cracking just enough to show the calculation underneath. Fine, take what you want from the barn, but don't go anywhere else on the property. And don't take all day about it. I have things to do. What kind of things? Gentry asked, genuinely curious about what occupied a new widow's time when she should be grieving. That's none of your business. Savina's voice sharpened. Thorne is gone, Gentry. This is my house now, my family now, my responsibility now. The sooner you accept that, the better off we'll all be. Gentry nodded and walked toward the barn, feeling her eyes burning into his back. The gravel crunched under his boots, each step taking him further from the house and deeper into memories of better days. He and Thorne had built that barn together when they were teenagers, working side by side while their father yelled instructions from the porch. The barn door hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, dust particles danced in the afternoon light. Thorne's workbench sat exactly where it always had, but something felt wrong. The tools were scattered, not arranged in the neat rows Thorne preferred. Drawers hung open. Someone had been searching through everything. Looking for something specific, Savina, he muttered, running his fingers along the workbench, that he found what he came for in the bottom drawer. Thorne's hand-carved chisel set, wrapped in an old towel. Their grandfather had made these tools, and Thorne had promised them to Gentry before he started his own family. Before Savina, he loaded the tools into his truck. Movement caught his eye. A curtain twitched in an upstairs window. Someone was watching him, but when he looked directly at the window, it went still. The house felt wrong, like something toxic was growing inside its walls. That he knocked on the front door again. This time, Savina took longer to answer, and when she did, her face was flushed and her breathing was slightly elevated, as if she'd been hurrying around inside. What now? She snapped. Where are the girls? He asked. What girls? Your daughters, Ainsley and Lyric. My nieces. Gentry stepped closer to the doorway, trying to see past her into the house. I haven't seen them since the funeral. Savina's jaw tightened, and she shifted position to block his view completely. Lyric is at a friend's house. Has been for weeks. Teenagers, you know how they are. They can't stand being around family when things get emotional. And Ainsley, the pause was too long. Just a few seconds, but long enough to confirm Gentry's suspicion that something was seriously wrong. Ainsley ran off about 3 weeks after the funeral. Probably hitched out of town with some boy. You know how girls that age can be. She's 13 years old. Almost 14. Girls mature fast these days. Savina shrugged, like she was discussing the weather. I filed a missing person report, but you know how teenage girls are. She'll come back when she gets hungry enough. Gentry studied her face carefully. No tears. No worry lines. No mother's anguish. No stepmother's concern. Just cold calculation and barely concealed irritation, as if discussing a missing child was an inconvenience rather than a tragedy. Did you check with her friends? Her teachers? The places she likes to hang out? Of course I did. I'm not stupid. Savina's voice sharpened with defensiveness. The police said most runaways come home within a week. It's been longer than that, so she's probably moved on to bigger things. Maybe she went to Nashville or Atlanta. Maybe she found some older boy with a car and money. Bigger things. Gentry repeated the words slowly, tasting their callousness. That's how you talk about your missing daughter? My missing stepdaughter, Savina corrected with emphasis. And I don't need parenting advice from a man who's never had kids of his own. You don't understand what it's like dealing with a troubled teenager who resents authority and makes up stories for attention. The words hit their mark, but Gentry didn't flinch. He'd learned long ago not to show Savina his weak spots. I want to see that police report. I don't think that's any of your business. Ainsley is my brother's daughter. That makes it my business. Savina stepped closer, and he could smell her perfume mixed with something else. Something chemical and sharp. Your brother is dead. Gentry, this is my house now, my family now, my responsibility now. You took your tools. Time to leave. She started to close the door, but Gentry put his boot against the frame. If you hear from Ainsley, you call me. Immediately. And if I don't, then I'll start asking questions you won't like answering. Savina smiled, but it never reached her eyes. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Gentry drove to the Motel 6 in town and checked into a room that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. He couldn't shake the feeling that Savina was lying about Ainsley, but he needed proof before he could do anything about it. He tried calling the local police station, but the desk sergeant told him the same thing Savina had. Teenage runaway, probably headed for Nashville or Atlanta. These things usually work themselves out. Did the mother seem concerned when she filed the report? Gentry asked. Can't really comment on ongoing cases, sir. It's been 3 weeks. How is it still ongoing? Sir, I really can't. Gentry hung up. Small-town police protecting small-town secrets. He'd seen it before. He tried calling the local police station, but the desk sergeant told him the same thing Savina had. Teenage runaway, probably headed for Nashville or Atlanta. These things usually work themselves out. The officer's tone suggested he'd had this conversation many times before and wasn't particularly interested in rehashing it again. Did the mother seem concerned when she filed the report? Gentry asked. Can't really comment on ongoing cases, sir. Privacy regulations, you understand. It's been 3 weeks. How is it still ongoing? Sir, I really can't discuss the details of an active investigation. Gentry hung up, frustrated by the bureaucratic wall of silence. Small-town police protecting small-town secrets. He'd seen it before during his time in the Army. The way local authorities closed ranks when outsiders started asking uncomfortable questions. That he spent the evening parked across the road from Thorne's house, using binoculars to watch for any sign of the girls. Lights went on and off in different rooms, but he never saw anyone at the windows. The house looked occupied, but somehow empty at the same time, like a stage set waiting for actors who never appeared. At 11 o'clock, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. A man got out, tall and broad-shouldered, definitely not Lyric's teenage boyfriend. The man went straight to the front door without knocking, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Savina let him in immediately, her body language suggesting familiarity and intimacy rather than casual friendship. Gentry took pictures with his phone's camera, zooming in on the license plate. The images were grainy in the darkness, but he could make out most of the numbers and letters. Tennessee plates, but not from the local county. Someone from out of town, someone with money, judging by the vehicle. 18 midnight, the man left. Gentry waited another hour, watching for any other activity, then drove back to the motel. He had more questions now than when he'd started, and all of them pointed toward Savina keeping dangerous secrets. The next morning, he returned to the house. This time, Savina's car wasn't in the driveway. A perfect opportunity to look around without interference, he parked at the end of the road and walked back through the woods, staying hidden among the pine trees. The house looked different in daylight, smaller and more rundown. The garden shed behind the house caught his attention. It had a new padlock on the door, shiny silver against the weatherwood. As he got closer, he heard something that made his blood run cold, barking. Frantic, desperate barking coming from inside the house. Scout. Thorne's old hunting dog. Gentry had assumed Savina got rid of the dog after Thorne died. She'd never liked animals, said they were dirty and expensive. But their Scout was, barking like his life depended on it. The barking wasn't random. It came in bursts, always directed toward the shed. Scout was trying to tell him something. Gentry approached the house slowly, watching for any sign that Savina had returned. The windows stayed dark. He could hear Scout scratching at something, probably the back door. The barking got louder as he approached the shed. Whatever Scout was trying to say, it had something to do with that locked building. Gentry examined the padlock. Brand new, expensive. The kind you used when you really didn't want someone getting inside. He pulled out his pocket knife and worked on the lock mechanism, but it was too sturdy for improvised tools. Scout's barking reached a fever pitch. All right, boy. I hear you. Gentry walked back to his truck and retrieved a crowbar from his toolbox. If Savina wanted to press charges for breaking and entering, let her try to explain why she needed a military-grade lock on a garden shed. The lock held, but the wooden door frame didn't. With a sharp crack, the door swung open. The smell hit him first. Human waste and fear and something else he couldn't identify right away. Then his eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through cracks in the wooden walls, and he saw her, Ainsley. His 13-year-old niece sat in the corner of the shed, chained to a metal post that had been driven deep into the dirt floor. Her hair hung in matted clumps around her face, greasy and unwashed for weeks. Her clothes were torn and filthy, hanging loose on a frame that had grown thin from malnutrition. Her feet were bare and covered in cuts and bruises from the rough wooden floor, but it was her eyes that nearly broke him. Hollow, haunted eyes that had seen too much and held too little hope. She looked up at him with the expression of a caged animal that had learned not to expect rescue. "Don't tell her I'm alive," she whispered, her voice barely audible and rough from dehydration. Gentry's hand shook as he pulled out his phone. He needed pictures, video, evidence that would stand up in court and send Savina to prison for the rest of her miserable life. But first, he needed to get Ainsley out of this hellhole and somewhere safe. "Ainsley, honey, it's Uncle Gentry. I'm going to get you out of here right now." She flinched when he moved toward her, pressing herself deeper into the corner like she expected to be hit. The movement revealed more of her condition. Rope burns around her wrists where she'd been tied up, bruises on her arms in various stages of healing, fingernails torn down to the quick from trying to claw her way free. "She said you wouldn't come looking. Said nobody cared enough to look for me." Ainsley's voice carried years of abandonment and resignation. Said I was just a burden that everybody wanted to get rid of. Well, she was wrong about every single word of that. Gentry knelt down slowly, moving like he would approach a wounded deer. "I'm here now, and I'm not leaving without you. Not ever." The chain around her ankle was secured with another padlock, this one smaller, but just as sturdy as the one on the door. Gentry used the crowbar to break the mounting bracket that held the chain to the metal post, working carefully to avoid jarring Ainsley's injured leg. The chain would have to stay until he could find proper tools to cut through the metal links. "Can you walk, sweetheart?" Ainsley nodded, but when she tried to stand, her legs buckled like a newborn colt. Gentry caught her before she fell, feeling how light she'd become. She couldn't weigh more than 80 pounds, probably less. At 13, she should have been growing stronger, not wasting away in a locked shed. How long have you been in here, honey? Since the day after Daddy's funeral. Savina said I knew too much. Said I couldn't be trusted to keep family business private. Ainsley leaned against him, drawing strength from human contact she'd been denied for months. She said if I told anyone what I saw on the hiking trail, they'd take me away from the family and put me in a place where bad things happen to children. Gentry's vision blurred with rage, but he forced himself to stay calm. Ainsley needed medical attention, and he needed documentation of her condition. Everything had to be done by the book if he wanted to destroy Savina completely. He helped Ainsley to his truck, supporting most of her weight. She was so thin he could feel her ribs through her torn shirt. In the passenger seat, she curled up like a wounded animal, clutching the seatbelt like a lifeline. Uncle Gentry. Her voice was small and scared. Is Daddy really dead? Yeah, honey. He's really dead. Savina killed him. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with accusation and truth. Tell me what happened. Ainsley. Tell me everything. Gentry drove to the urgent care clinic in the next town over, 40 minutes away from Hollow Creek and Savina's network of friends and favors. He needed medical professionals who didn't know the family history, people who would document Ainsley's condition without local bias. During the drive, Ainsley told him what she'd witnessed on the hiking trail 2 months ago. Daddy said he was leaving her, said he was taking me and Lyric somewhere safe. They were fighting about it when they went hiking that morning. I followed them because I was scared. Her voice was hoarse from weeks of minimal water, but she pushed through the story like she'd been rehearsing it in her head. She pushed him off the ridge. Just like that. He was standing near the edge, yelling about custody papers, and she got behind him and pushed. I saw his face when he fell. He was so surprised. Gentry's knuckles were white against the steering wheel. What happened after that? She told me it was an accident. Said if I told anyone the truth, they'd take me away from the family and put me in foster care with strangers. Said Daddy fell because he was being careless. But you didn't believe her. No, I saw what I saw. Ainsley's voice got stronger. So the next morning, she put me in the shed. Said it was temporary, just until she could figure out what to do with me. That was 2 months ago. At the clinic, Gentry lied smoothly to the intake nurse, his story prepared and practiced during the drive. Ainsley was his niece, he explained, and she'd been living with someone who was mentally unfit to care for a child. He'd just discovered her condition after receiving a tip from a concerned neighbor and brought her in immediately for medical evaluation. The nurse took one look at Ainsley's condition and called for a doctor without asking additional questions. Within minutes, they were in an examination room where a pediatrician began documenting injuries and signs of neglect with the methodical thoroughness of someone who'd seen too many abuse cases. Doctor Sarah Martinez was in her 50s, with gray streak hair and tired eyes that had witnessed decades of human cruelty. She examined Ainsley with gentle hands and a soft voice, explaining each step of the process to help the girl feel safe and in control. I'm going to take some pictures of your injuries. Honey, this might feel uncomfortable, but it's important for helping you get better and making sure the people who hurt you face consequences. Gentry filmed everything with his phone, making sure the timestamp was visible in each frame. The evidence needed to be ironclad, documented by multiple sources, impossible to dispute or dismiss in court. Dehydration severe enough to require immediate fluids. Malnutrition that had affected her growth and development. Infected cuts on her feet from walking on rough wooden floors without shoes. Ligature marks around her ankle where the chain had rubbed her skin raw over weeks of confinement. Rope burns on her wrists that suggested periods of additional restraint. Signs of psychological trauma that would require long-term therapy to address. Dr. Martinez's face grew darker with each discovery, her professional composure barely containing her anger at what had been done to this child. Sir, I'm required by law to report suspected child abuse to the authorities. This child has been systematically tortured and neglected. I understand completely, Gentry said, meeting her eyes directly. I want you to make that report. This child needs protection from the people who did this to her. The doctor nodded and stepped out to make the call. 20 minutes later, a social worker arrived to interview Ainsley privately. Laura Thompson was a kind woman in her 30s who specialized in trauma cases involving children. She brought coloring books and juice boxes, simple tools to help Ainsley feel comfortable enough to share her story. Another 20 minutes after that, a sheriff's deputy showed up to take an initial report. Deputy James Wilson was a veteran officer who'd worked child abuse cases for years. He understood the importance of proper documentation and the need to build trust with traumatized victims. Gentry was ready for all of it. He wanted official documentation, wanted Ainsley's condition on the record, wanted the state's child protection machinery engaged and moving. Every step of the process created another piece of evidence that would eventually bury Savina. While the professionals did their work, Gentry called his old friend Deacon Rowe. They'd served together in Afghanistan, where Deacon had saved Gentry's life during a roadside bomb attack. The debt between them was the kind that could never be fully repaid, only honored through continued loyalty and trust. Deacon ran an auto repair shop on the outskirts of town and had never liked Savina, seeing through her manipulation and greed long before Thorne's death. More importantly, he was discreet and loyal and had plenty of room at his place for a scared teenager who needed safety and stability. "I need a favor, Deacon. A big one that might put you in an uncomfortable position." "Name it, brother. You know I owe you." "I need somewhere safe for Ainsley to stay while the state sorts out custody issues. Somewhere Savina can't find her or pressure her into changing her story." Deacon didn't hesitate. "Bring her over. Mary's been wanting kids around the house anyway, and we got that guest room that's just sitting empty." 3 hours later, Ainsley was settled in Deacon's guest room with clean clothes, a hot meal, and a promise that no one could take her away without going through Gentry first. The social worker had agreed to the temporary placement while they investigated the abuse allegations, recognizing that keeping Ainsley away from her abuser was the immediate priority. Mary Rowe treated Ainsley like the daughter she'd never had, offering gentle comfort without overwhelming questions. She prepared a bedroom with soft blankets, clean pajamas, and a teddy bear that had belonged to her own childhood. Simple gestures that began the long process of teaching Ainsley that she was safe and valued. That night, Gentry sat on Deacon's back porch and listened to his niece tell him the rest of the story. Her voice was stronger now, fortified by proper medical care and the security of knowing she was protected. The details emerged slowly, carefully, like pieces of a puzzle that formed a picture of calculated evil. Savina has been seeing another man for months. Someone with money and a fancy car. Daddy found out about it and said he was going to change his will to make sure she couldn't inherit anything if something happened to him. "Did your dad tell you this directly, or did you overhear conversations?" "I heard them fighting about it late at night when they thought I was asleep." Savina said he couldn't cut her out because they were married and she had legal rights. Daddy said he'd already talked to a lawyer about it. Said she'd signed papers before they got married that would protect his assets if they divorced or if she tried to claim inheritance money she didn't deserve. Gentry pulled out his phone and started a voice recording, making sure the file would automatically back up to cloud storage. "Ainsley, I need you to tell me everything again, exactly the way it happened. This recording might be important evidence later, so I want to make sure we capture every detail accurately." She nodded with the serious expression of someone far older than her 13 years. The imprisonment had stolen her childhood innocence, but it had also given her a clear understanding of justice and consequences that many adults never developed. Savina told Daddy she loved him and would never cheat on him, but I saw her talking on her phone to someone late at night. She would whisper and giggle like a teenager, then hang up real quick if anyone came near. She started wearing prettier clothes and expensive perfume, stuff that costs more money than we usually spend on things like that. She nodded and started over, speaking clearly and calmly. As she talked, Gentry realized that his 13-year-old niece had just handed him the motive for Thorne's murder. Insurance money and inheritance, combined with a cheating wife who stood to lose everything in a divorce. What about Lyric? Does she know what really happened? Ainsley's face fell. "She knows. She was there that morning at the house when Savina came back all dirty and upset. Savina told her that Daddy fell, but Lyric saw her burning some clothes in the backyard fire pit. She asked me about it later when we were alone. Did you tell her what you saw on the trail? I tried to, but Lyric was scared. Savina promised her that everything would be fine if she just kept quiet about the whole thing. So they could be a real family now, just the three of them. Gentry stopped the recording and saved it to his cloud storage account. Multiple copies, multiple locations. Too important to risk losing. Ainsley, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. She looked at him with eyes that were older than her 13 years. Are you strong enough to testify about what you saw? In court, in front of a judge and jury. Will it put her in prison? If we do this right, yes. For a very long time. Ainsley didn't hesitate. Then yes, I'm strong enough. Gentry spent the next morning at the county courthouse, studying property records and marriage certificates. Savina had been telling the truth about one thing. She was legally married to Thorne, which gave her certain rights to his estate. But Gentry remembered Thorne mentioning a prenuptial agreement, something about protecting family assets from future wives. The will on file at the courthouse was 2 years old, naming Savina as the primary beneficiary of Thorne's estate, including the house, land, and personal property. But if Thorne had been planning to change it, there might be evidence of those intentions somewhere in the house drafts of new documents, lawyer correspondence, or notes about his plans. That afternoon, he drove back to Thorne's property, parking at the tree line and approaching through the woods to avoid being seen. Savina's car was gone again, but this time he noticed fresh tire tracks in the driveway. Deep grooves in the gravel suggested someone had been coming and going regularly, possibly carrying heavy items or moving quickly. The front door was locked, but Gentry still had a key from years ago when he used to check on the house during Thorne's business trips. Inside, everything looked normal at first glance, furniture in place. No signs of burglary or obvious disturbance. But when he reached Thorne's home office, the truth became clear. Someone had been searching systematically through every piece of paper in the room. Drawers hung open with contents scattered across the desktop. Filing cabinets had been emptied, their contents sorted into piles that suggested someone looking for specific documents. The computer was missing entirely, along with any backup drives or storage devices that might have contained important files. Someone had been looking for something specific, something important enough to risk breaking into a dead man's house and tearing apart his private papers. Gentry searched more carefully than whoever had been there before him, checking places that might not be obvious to someone unfamiliar with Thorne's habits. His brother had always been paranoid about important documents, hiding copies in unexpected locations throughout the house. Behind Thorne's desk, wedged between the wall and a filing cabinet in a space barely wide enough for fingers, he found an old tablet computer that had been overlooked in the search. The battery was completely dead, but when he plugged it into the charger, it came to life with a soft electronic chime. Thorne had never been good with technology, which meant he probably never deleted anything from the device. Emails, text messages, photos, and documents would all be preserved exactly as he'd left them. Gentry scrolled through recent activity, looking for anything about lawyers or wills or marriage problems. The evidence was buried in the deleted folder, probably removed by accident rather than intentionally hidden. A text conversation between Thorne and someone named J. Patterson, dated just 3 days before Thorne's death. The timestamp showed the messages had been exchanged late at night, suggesting urgency and secrecy. Thorne, need to set up appointment to modify, will ASAP. Want to exclude current wife from inheritance completely. J. Patterson, can do. Prenup should protect most assets anyway. How soon do you need this done? Thorne, immediately. I think she knows I'm planning to leave. Things are getting dangerous here at home. J. Patterson, dangerous how? Are you in physical danger? Thorne, she's been talking about life insurance payouts lately, asking weird questions about accidental death benefits and how quickly claims get processed. Something's not right with her behavior. J. Patterson, have you considered involving law enforcement? Thorne, not yet. Need to get legal protection in place first. Can't risk her finding out about the will change before it's finalized. The conversation ended there, frozen in time by Thorne's death 3 days later. Gentry screenshotted every message and forwarded them to his own phone, then saved backup copies to multiple cloud storage accounts. This was evidence of premeditation, Savina planning her husband's murder while he desperately tried to protect himself through legal channels. Then he searched for J. Patterson online and found James Patterson, attorney at law with an office in Nashville, that he called the number immediately. Mr. Patterson, this is Gentry Maddox. I'm calling about my brother Thorne Maddox. I'm sorry for your loss. Thorne seemed like a good man from our brief interactions. Brief interactions? He called me about changing his will, but we never had the chance to meet in person. I heard about the accident a few days later. Did he explain why he wanted to exclude his wife from the inheritance? Patterson paused. I'm not sure I should discuss client confidentiality, even with family members. My brother is dead, Mr. Patterson. His wife is abusing his children. Confidentiality doesn't matter anymore. Another pause. He said he discovered his wife was having an affair. He wanted to protect his daughter's inheritance and make sure his ex-wife couldn't claim half of everything in a divorce proceeding. Ex-wife, that's what he said. He was planning to file for divorce immediately after securing the will modification. He seemed to think his life might be in danger if his wife found out about his plans. Gentry thanked the lawyer and hung up. Another piece of evidence, another nail in Savina's coffin. But he needed more than deleted text messages and hearsay testimony. He walked out to the backyard fire pit, where Ainsley said Savina had burned some clothes. The ashes were mostly cold, but when he sifted through them with a stick, he found fragments of paper that hadn't burned completely. Most of the pieces were too damaged to read, but one larger fragment caught his attention. It looked like part of a journal page, written in Thorne's handwriting. Think she's seeing someone. Caught her on the phone twice this week, whispering and hanging up when I walked in. I don't trust her near Ainsley anymore. The way she looks at that girl sometimes, like she's planning something. The rest of the page was burned beyond recognition, but it was enough. Gentry photographed the fragment from multiple angles, then carefully placed it in a plastic bag. He spent another hour searching the property, checking every hiding spot he could remember from their childhood. In the barn, behind a loose board in the wall, he found something that made his heart race, but a manila envelope containing insurance documents. Thorne's life insurance policy, with a payout amount of $500,000. The beneficiary was listed as Savina Maddox, but there was a handwritten note in the margin. Change beneficiary to daughters only scheduled for next week. The note was in Thorne's handwriting and dated 2 days before his death. Gentry photographed everything and put the documents back exactly where he found them. Let Savina think her secrets were still safe. Meanwhile, he'd built an evidence file that would bury her so deep she'd never see daylight again that he called his friend Tommy Rodriguez, who worked for a private investigation firm in Nashville. Tommy owed him a favor from their Army days, and now it was time to collect. I need bank records for someone. Specifically, I need to know if a life insurance claim has been paid out recently. That's not exactly legal, Gentry. Neither is murdering your husband and locking his daughter in a shed for 2 months. Tommy was quiet for a moment. Send me the details. I'll see what I can do. By the end of the day, Gentry had documented evidence of Thorne's intention to exclude Savina from his will, Thorne's suspicion that his life was in danger, Savina's affair, with an unknown man, Thorne's plan to change his insurance beneficiary, Savina's suspicious behavior after Thorne's death. It was a good start, but it wasn't enough to prove murder. He needed someone else to corroborate Ainsley's story about the hiking trail incident that he needed Lyric. Finding Lyric took 2 days of careful surveillance and systematic detective work. Savina had claimed her older daughter was staying with friends, but a 16-year-old girl leaves traces in a modern world. Social media posts that reveal locations, school attendance records that show patterns, friends who talk too much on public platforms. Gentry approached the investigation methodically, starting with Lyric's social media accounts and working outward through her network of connections. Her Instagram showed recent posts from a coffee shop downtown, always at the same corner table, always with textbooks spread around her like protective barriers. The timestamp suggested she went there every weekday afternoon, probably to avoid going home. He found her at Java Junction on a Thursday afternoon, sitting alone at her usual spot with chemistry homework spread across the small table. She looked exactly like Thorne. Same dark hair that caught the light when she moved, same serious expression when concentrating, same way of chewing on her pencil when working through difficult problems. Gentry bought a large coffee and approached her table slowly, making sure she could see him coming. He didn't want to startle her or trigger a flight response that would end the conversation before it started. "Hello, Lyric." She looked up from her textbook, startled, then immediately glanced toward the exit like she was calculating distances and escape routes. Her body language screamed guilt and fear in equal measures. "Uncle Gentry." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't know you were still in town." "Don't," Gentry said quietly, settling into the chair across from her without being invited. "Don't run. Don't make excuses. Don't pretend you don't know why I'm here. We need to talk about your sister. I don't have anything to say to you." But her hands were shaking as she gathered her textbooks, preparing to leave. "I found Ainsley." The words hit Lyric like a physical blow. Her face went white, her pencil clattered onto the table, and her carefully maintained composure crumbled completely. Tears started running down her cheeks before she could stop them. "I don't know what you're talking about." The denial was automatic, but her body language told a completely different story. Relief and guilt and terror all mixed together in her expression. "She was locked in the garden shed behind your house, chained up like an animal, starving and dehydrated and scared out of her mind." Gentry kept his voice gentle but firm, building trust while establishing the facts. "Your stepmother told me Ainsley ran away. Told the police the same lie. But you know better, don't you?" Lyric shook her head, but the gesture was weak and unconvincing. "You don't understand what it's been like. Living in that house, trying to keep everything normal when nothing was normal anymore. Then help me understand. Tell me what you saw that morning on the hiking trail." "I don't know what you mean." Another automatic denial, but her defenses were cracking with each question. "Yes, you do." Gentry leaned forward, maintaining eye contact. "Ainsley told me you were at the house when Savina came back all dirty and upset. She told me you saw Savina burning clothes in the fire pit afterward." Lyric's composure finally shattered completely. "You don't understand the position I was in. If I said anything, she would have." "She would have what?" "Killed you like she killed your father." The words hit like a sledgehammer. Lyric physically flinched and wrapped her arms around herself in a protective gesture. "She said it was an accident. Said he fell because he wasn't being careful near the edge of the trail." Lyric's voice broke with the weight of months of suppressed truth. "She said hikers fall all the time, especially when they're angry and not paying attention to where they're walking." "And you believed her." "I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her." Lyric wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Because if she murdered him, that means I've been living with a killer for 2 months. That means I helped her cover it up by staying silent. That means I'm an accessory to my own father's murder." Gentry leaned forward, keeping his voice gentle but firm. "Lyric, look at me. You were 16 years old and scared and manipulated by an adult who should have been protecting you. None of this is your fault. She promised me that everything would be fine if I just stayed quiet. Said we could be a real family, just the 3 of us. Said she'd take care of me and make sure I had everything I needed for college. And in exchange, all you had to do was forget about Ainsley." Lyric nodded miserably. She said Ainsley was disturbed by grief. Said she was making up stories about what happened on the trail because she couldn't accept that Daddy was really gone. But you knew Ainsley wasn't lying. I knew. God help me. I knew, and I let it happen anyway. Gentry pulled out his phone and set it on the table between them. "I'm going to record our conversation now. You're going to tell me exactly what you saw and heard, and then we're going to write it down and get it notarized. Do you understand?" Lyric stared at the phone like it was a poisonous snake. "If I do this, she'll know it came from me. She'll figure out I talked. If you don't do this, she gets away with murder. She gets away with torturing your sister. She gets away with all of it." Gentry's voice hardened. "And someday, when you're older and you're lying awake at night thinking about this moment, you'll know that you had a chance to do the right thing and you chose not to take it. Lyric closed her eyes and took a shaky breath. When she opened them again, something had changed in her expression. The scared 16-year-old was still there, but underneath it was something stronger. Okay, I'll tell you everything. The recording lasted 45 minutes. Lyric described the morning of Thorne's death in painful detail. The shouting match between her father and stepmother, Savina's return to the house with dirt on her clothes and scratches on her face, the burning of evidence in the backyard fire pit. She made me help her move some things around in Daddy's office. Said she was looking for important papers that needed to be filed with the insurance company. But I think she was really looking for that lawyer's contact information. Did she find it? I don't know. She sent me to my room after that and told me not to come out until she said it was okay. After the recording, they drove to a notary public's office where Lyric signed a sworn affidavit detailing everything she'd witnessed. The notary asked if she was giving her statement voluntarily and if she understood the legal implications of perjury. Yes, ma'am, Lyric said. I understand completely. Walking back to Gentry's truck, Lyric asked the question he'd been dreading. What happens to me now? I don't have anywhere else to go. You're coming with me. I've got temporary custody of Ainsley, and I'm going to get custody of you too. Savina won't let that happen. Savina won't have a choice. By the time I'm done with her, she'll be in prison for the rest of her life. Lyric stopped walking and looked at him with an expression that reminded him painfully of Thorne. Do you really think you can make that happen? Do you really think you can get justice for my dad? Gentry thought about Ainsley chained in the shed, about Thorne's deleted text messages, about the insurance money and the burned evidence, and the 2 months of lies. Yes, he said, I'm going to destroy her. Gentry knew better than to trust the local police with a case this big. Hollow Creek was a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and Judge Hollis Claiborne had his fingers in half the pies in the county. Savina had mentioned him at the funeral, called him Uncle Hollis, and talked about him like family. Instead, Gentry drove to Nashville and walked into the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation field office with a manila folder full of evidence and a determination to see justice done. Special Agent Lisa Chun was a serious woman in her 40s who listened to his story without interruption. When he finished, she spread his evidence across her desk like pieces of a puzzle. This is substantial, she said, but most of it is circumstantial. The strongest evidence you have is the child's testimony about witnessing the incident on the hiking trail. Ainsley saw Savina push Thorne off the ridge. That's not circumstantial. It's the word of a 13-year-old girl who's been traumatized and isolated for 2 months. Defense attorneys eat cases like that for breakfast. Gentry leaned forward. Then what do you suggest? We need to build a stronger case before we make any arrests. Right now, we have evidence of child abuse, which is serious enough. But if we want to make murder charges stick, we need more than just witness testimony. Agent Chin assigned a team to investigate Thorne's death, starting with a request to exhume his body for a more thorough autopsy. The original examination had been cursory, focused on confirming accidental death rather than looking for signs of foul play. Meanwhile, Gentry provided the TBI with everything he'd collected. Medical documentation of Ainsley's abuse from the clinic photographs and video footage from the shed, Thorne's deleted text messages about changing his will, the burned journal fragments from the fire pit, Lyric's sworn affidavit describing Savina's behavior after Thorne's death, evidence of insurance fraud. Claiming benefits while knowing Thorne planned to change the beneficiary, Tommy Rodriguez came through with the bank records, which showed that Savina had indeed received a $500,000 life insurance payout just 1 week after Thorne's funeral. She deposited the money into a new account that Thorne's name wasn't on, then immediately transferred most of it to an offshore banking facility. She was planning to disappear, Agent Chun said, studying the financial records. This looks like someone setting up to run if things got too hot. The TBI investigation moved with the systematic precision of experienced professionals who understood that murder cases required absolute thoroughness. Agent Chun assigned a team of specialists to examine every aspect of Thorne's death, starting with a formal request to exhume his body for a comprehensive forensic autopsy. The original examination had been conducted by the local coroner, Dr. Pete Williams, who was 68 years old and had been doing the job for 30 years in a county where suspicious deaths were rare. Williams had performed a standard external examination, focusing on confirming accidental death rather than looking for subtle signs of foul play that might indicate murder. Small-town coroners often miss things. Agent Chun explained to Gentry during a briefing session at the TBI field office. Not because they're incompetent, but because they're not looking for evidence of homicide when the circumstances appear straightforward. A hiker falls off a cliff. It seems obvious what happened. But when you start examining the body with murder in mind, different details become significant. Meanwhile, Gentry continued building his evidence file with a methodical approach of someone who understood that cases were won through documentation rather than emotion. He provided the TBI with everything he'd collected, organizing it into categories that would make sense to prosecutors and juries. Physical evidence from the shed, medical documentation of Ainsley's abuse from the clinic, photographs and video footage showing her condition, and samples of the chain and padlock used to restrain her. Digital evidence. Thorne's deleted text messages about changing his will, email communications with the lawyer, and social media activity that showed family tensions. Leading up to his death, witness testimony. Lyric's sworn affidavit describing Savina's behavior after Thorne's death, along with audio recordings of both girls describing what they witnessed and experienced. Financial evidence. Documentation of Savina's attempt to collect insurance money while knowing Thorne planned to change the beneficiary, along with bank records showing suspicious money transfers. Pattern evidence. The burned journal fragments from the fire pit, the systematic search of Thorne's office, and evidence of Savina's affair with Marcus Webb. Tommy Rodriguez came through with additional financial records that painted an even clearer picture of Savina's motives and planning. The bank documents showed that she had indeed received a $500,000 life insurance payout just 1 week after Thorne's funeral. Rather than depositing the money into their joint account, she'd opened a new account in her name only, then immediately transferred most of the funds to an offshore banking facility in the Cayman Islands. This behavior pattern suggests someone preparing to disappear if the investigation got too close, Agent Chen explained, studying the financial timeline. She wasn't just stealing insurance money. She was setting up an escape route in case law enforcement started asking uncomfortable questions. The investigation gained momentum as more evidence emerged from multiple sources. TBI agents interviewed the insurance company representatives who had processed Savina's claim, discovering that she'd called about the payout within 48 hours of Thorne's death, asking specific questions about how quickly accidental death benefits could be processed and whether there were any circumstances that might delay payment. They also spoke with Dr. Williams, the original coroner, who admitted that he'd been under pressure from local officials to expedite the death certificate for administrative purposes. Judge Claiborne had personally called his office, requesting that the paperwork be completed quickly to help the widow deal with insurance and estate matters. "I should have been more thorough," Williams admitted during his interview with TBI agents. But when a judge calls and says a grieving widow needs help with paperwork, you tend to prioritize efficiency over exhaustive examination. Meanwhile, investigators identified and interviewed several of Thorne's friends and co-workers who confirmed that he'd been planning to leave Savina. Tom Bradley, who worked with Thorne at the lumberyard, described conversations where Thorne expressed fear about his wife's behavior and intentions. He said she'd been asking weird questions about his life insurance policy, Bradley told agents. Wanted to know how much it was worth and whether it paid out the same amount for accidents as it did for natural death. Thorne thought it was strange because they'd never talked about insurance before, and suddenly she was real interested in the details. The TBI had enough evidence to file charges. On a Tuesday morning in late September, they executed a sealed arrest warrant at Savina's house. The arrest went down at 7 o'clock in the morning, just as Savina was getting ready to leave town. TBI agents found her car packed with suitcases and a manila envelope full of cash. In her purse, they discovered a one-way plane ticket to Costa Rica scheduled for that afternoon. Gentry watched from across the street as they led her out in handcuffs. She was screaming about false accusations and demanding to call her lawyer, but her voice had lost all its earlier composure. The cold, calculating woman he'd known for years was finally showing her true face, desperate and cornered and dangerous. The charges were extensive. First-degree murder in the death of Thorne Maddox, child abuse, and false imprisonment of Ainsley Maddox, obstruction of justice for destroying evidence, insurance fraud, for collecting benefits. She wasn't entitled to attempted flight. To avoid prosecution, the local news crews arrived within hours, turning Savina's arrest into the biggest story Hollow Creek had seen in decades. Gentry gave a brief statement to reporters, focusing on Ainsley's recovery and thanking the TBI for their thorough investigation. Judge Hollis Claiborne tried to intervene, calling the district attorney's office and demanding that the charges be reduced or dismissed. But the TBI had built an airtight case, and the DA's office wasn't interested in political favors when it came to child abuse and murder. When Claiborne realized his influence wasn't working, he tried a different approach. He recused himself from the case and recommended that it be transferred to a judge in Nashville, citing potential conflicts of interest. Too late for that. Agent Chun told Gentry, "We've already documented his attempts to interfere with the investigation. Internal Affairs is opening a judicial misconduct case against him." Savina's bail hearing was held 3 days after her arrest. The prosecutor argued that she was a flight risk, pointing to the packed car and the plane ticket to a non-extradition country. The defense attorney argued that she was a grieving widow being railroaded by vindictive in-laws. The judge wasn't buying it. Given the serious nature of these charges and the evidence of attempted flight, bail is denied. The defendant will remain in custody until trial. Gentry felt something release in his chest as the gavel came down. For the first time in months, he could breathe freely. Savina would spend the next year in jail while lawyers prepared for trial, and that meant Ainsley and Lyric were truly safe. While Savina sat in her cell, Gentry focused on rebuilding his niece's lives. Ainsley started therapy to deal with the trauma of her imprisonment, while Lyric worked with a counselor to process her guilt over staying silent for so long. The custody paperwork moved through the courts with surprising speed. Social services had documented Savina's abuse thoroughly, and no other family members stepped forward to challenge Gentry's petition for guardianship. "I want a chance to do something right," Lyric told the family court judge. "I want to live with Uncle Gentry and help take care of Ainsley." The girls moved into Gentry's house in Nashville, 30 miles away from Hollow Creek and all its dark memories. Ainsley got her own room, painted blue like the sky, with windows that had no locks and a door that stayed open whenever she wanted it to. Lyric threw herself in her senior year of high school, determined to earn scholarships for college. In the evenings, she helped Ainsley with homework and slowly rebuilt the sisterly relationship that Savina had tried to destroy. 3 months before the trial, Gentry got a call from investigative journalist Rebecca Stone at the Nashville Banner. She'd been following the case and wanted to write a feature story about family secrets and small-town corruption. "I've uncovered some additional information about Judge Claiborne," she said. "Information that might interest the prosecution team." Stone's investigation revealed that Claiborne had been taking bribes and political favors for years, including several payoffs from Marcus Webb's real estate company. Webb had been trying to get permits for a controversial development project, and Claiborne had been smoothing the way through local zoning boards. "It's a whole network of corruption," Stone explained. Webb was paying Claiborne, Claiborne was protecting Webb's business interests, and Savina was Webb's lover and accomplice. The story ran on the front page of the Sunday edition with the headline, "The Maddox Secret, The Girl in the Shed." It detailed Ainsley's imprisonment, Savina's affair, and the web of corruption that had enabled the cover-up. Within hours of publication, the story went viral on social media. National news outlets picked it up. True crime podcasters started calling for interviews. The case became a symbol of justice delayed, but not denied. Judge Claiborne resigned in disgrace the following Monday, citing health problems and family obligations. The Tennessee Judicial Council opened a formal investigation into his conduct, with criminal charges likely to follow. Marcus Webb was arrested on conspiracy and corruption charges, his real estate empire crumbling as banks and investors fled in panic. His wife filed for divorce, and his children refused to speak to him. The dominoes were falling exactly as Gentry had planned. The trial began on a cold February morning with snow falling steadily outside the courthouse windows, creating an appropriately somber atmosphere for the pursuit of justice. The Davidson County Courthouse in Nashville had been chosen as the venue after the defense unsuccessfully argued for a change of location due to pretrial publicity. Gentry sat in the front row of the gallery, with Ainsley and Lyric flanking him, three survivors of Savina's cruelty, ready to witness the legal system deliver consequences for her crimes. Behind them, the courtroom was packed with reporters, curious citizens, and family friends who had followed the case through months of investigation and legal maneuvering. The prosecution team was led by Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Martinez, a seasoned prosecutor who specialized in domestic violence and family murder cases. Martinez had built her reputation on methodical case presentation and her ability to help juries understand the psychology of family killers. She understood that proving premeditated murder required more than just evidence. It required helping 12 ordinary citizens comprehend how someone could plan and execute the murder of their spouse. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Martinez began during opening statements. Over the next week, you will hear evidence that demonstrates how greed, selfishness, and cold calculation led the defendant to commit the ultimate betrayal of family trust. You will learn how Savina Maddox systematically planned and executed her husband's murder, then tortured his 13-year-old daughter to silence the only witness to her crime. The prosecution's case unfolded with the precision of a master craftsman assembling a complex piece of furniture. Each piece of evidence was presented individually, explained thoroughly, then connected to the larger pattern of guilt that emerged when all the facts were considered together. Martinez started with the financial motive, walking the jury through Thorne's discovery of Savina's affair and his subsequent plan to change his will and insurance beneficiary. The text messages between Thorne and his lawyer were displayed on large screens, allowing jurors to read the desperate urgency in Thorne's final communications. Notice the timeline, Martinez explained, pointing to the dates and timestamps. Thorne discovers his wife's affair on Monday. He contacts his lawyer on Tuesday to change his will. He expresses fear for his physical safety on Wednesday. He dies under suspicious circumstances on Friday. This is not coincidence, this is premeditation. Next came the medical evidence, presented by Dr. Elizabeth Reeves with the kind of clinical precision that made the brutality of Thorne's death undeniably clear. Using photographs, anatomical models, and detailed diagrams, she explained how the pattern of injuries proved Thorne had been attacked and murdered rather than accidentally fallen. The defendant struck her husband in the head with a heavy object, probably a rock she picked up from the trail, Dr. Reeves testified. The blow was designed to incapacitate him, not kill him immediately. She wanted him conscious enough to experience the fall, but disoriented enough that he couldn't save himself. The psychological torture of Ainsley was documented through testimony from Dr. Sarah Martinez, the pediatrician who had treated her after the rescue, and Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the trauma therapist who had been working with her for months. Both doctors explained how prolonged isolation and physical restraint could cause lasting psychological damage to a developing adolescent. The defendant didn't just lock this child away to silence her, Dr. Walsh explained to the jury. She systematically broke down her sense of self-worth and hope for rescue. This was torture designed to ensure the child would be too psychologically damaged to testify effectively against her. When it came time for Ainsley to testify, Judge Harrison allowed her to appear via closed-circuit television from a private room with trauma counselors present. The arrangement protected her from the intimidation of facing her abuser in open court while still allowing the jury to evaluate her credibility and demeanor. Ainsley's testimony was devastating in its clarity and composure. Speaking in a steady voice that betrayed no uncertainty or confusion, she described the morning she followed her parents to the hiking trail and witnessed her stepmother commit murder. She got behind him when he was yelling about the divorce papers and custody arrangements. Ainsley testified, her words captured by microphones and broadcast throughout the silent courtroom. She picked up a rock about the size of a football and hit him in the back of the head. He fell forward and tried to catch himself, but she pushed him over the edge while he was still trying to get his balance back. The defense attorney, Robert Shun, attempted to shake her story through cross-examination, suggesting that grief and months of isolation might have distorted her memories of what actually happened. But Ainsley never wavered, never contradicted herself, never lost her composure under questioning. "I know what I saw," she said, looking directly into the camera that connected her to the courtroom. "I know the difference between an accident and murder. What I saw was murder." The insurance company testified that Savina had called about the payout just 2 days after Thorne's death, asking specific questions about accidental death benefits and how quickly claims could be processed. Bank employees described her behavior when depositing the insurance money: nervous, agitated, asking about offshore transfers and anonymous accounts. The medical examiner explained the difference between accidental fall injuries and deliberate assault injuries, using photographs and diagrams that made the jury visibly uncomfortable. Marcus Webb, facing his own criminal charges, testified against Savina in exchange for a reduced sentence. He described their affair, her complaints about her husband's controlling behavior, and her hints about wanting to be free to start a new life. She said Thorne was threatening to cut her off financially, Webb testified. She said she needed to find a way to secure her future before he could change his will. The defense mounted a weak case based on character witnesses and claims that Savina was a loving mother who would never harm children. But the photographs of Ainsley's condition in the shed spoke louder than any character references. Closing arguments lasted 2 days. The prosecutor reminded the jury that murder was murder, regardless of family relationships or financial motives. The defense attorney made a desperate plea for reasonable doubt, suggesting that grieving children might have misinterpreted innocent actions. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Savina's face went white as the verdicts were read. Murder in the first degree, child abuse, false imprisonment, insurance fraud, obstruction of justice, attempted flight to avoid prosecution. During the sentencing phase 3 weeks later, both Ainsley and Lyric read victim impact statements that demonstrated how Savina's crimes had affected their lives far beyond the immediate physical and emotional damage. These statements serve an important purpose in the legal process, helping the judge understand the full scope of harm caused by the defendant's actions. Ainsley spoke first, her voice stronger now after months of therapy and the security of knowing her abuser would never be able to hurt her again. She described the nightmares that still woke her up at night, the panic attacks that struck without warning, and the trust issues that would probably follow her for years to come. "Before this happened, I used to feel safe in my own home," Ainsley read from her prepared statement. "I used to believe that adults were there to protect children, not hurt them. I used to think that family meant love and safety. The defendant stole all of that from me. She stole my childhood, my sense of security, and my faith in the goodness of people." Lyric's statement focused on the guilt and shame she carried from staying silent while her sister suffered, emotions that required ongoing therapy to process and overcome. Her words illustrated how Savina's crimes had created multiple victims, extending the damage far beyond the immediate targets of her violence. "The defendant forced me to choose between protecting myself and protecting my sister," Lyric testified. "She made me complicit in my father's murder and my sister's torture by threatening to hurt me if I told the truth. I have to live with the knowledge that I chose my own safety over my sister's welfare, and that choice will haunt me for the rest of my life." But perhaps the most powerful moment of the sentencing hearing came when Lyric looked directly at Savina for the first time since the arrest and delivered words that captured the essence of what justice meant to the surviving family members. "The defendant stole more than my father's life," Lyric said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "She stole my childhood, my sister's innocence, and our family's future. She turned our home into a place of fear and secrets. She made us prisoners in our own lives. She deserves no mercy because she showed none to the people who should have been able to trust her most." Judge Patricia Harrison had presided over criminal cases for 25 years and had developed a reputation for fair but firm sentencing that reflected both the severity of crimes and the impact on victims. As she prepared to announce Savina's sentence, she addressed the defendant directly with words that would be quoted in news reports for months afterward. "Mrs. Maddox, you have been convicted by a jury of your peers of some of the most heinous crimes that can be committed against family members. You murdered your husband in cold blood for money. You tortured a child to cover up your crime. You showed no remorse, no humanity, no recognition of the evil you have inflicted on innocent people. The judge paused, consulting her notes before continuing with the formal sentencing announcement. You have been found guilty of first-degree murder, which carries a sentence of life imprisonment. You have been found guilty of aggravated child abuse and false imprisonment, which carry additional sentences of 20 years each. You have been found guilty of obstruction of justice and insurance fraud, which carry additional sentences of 5 years each. Judge Harrison looked directly at Savina as she delivered the final calculation. I hereby sentence you to 38 years in the Tennessee State Prison System, with no possibility of parole for 25 years. This means you will be eligible for parole consideration at age 67, assuming you live that long and demonstrate genuine rehabilitation, which seems unlikely given your complete lack of remorse. The gavel came down with a sound that seemed to echo through the courtroom like a final punctuation mark on 2 years of investigation, prosecution, and pursuit of justice. Savina's face remained impassive as the sentence was announced, showing neither surprise nor emotion, as if she had expected this outcome all along. The AS court officers led Savina away in shackles for the last time. Gentry felt something release in his chest that he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The systematic pursuit of justice that had consumed his life for 2 years was finally complete. Savina would spend the rest of her productive adult life in prison, and by the time she became eligible for parole, she would be an elderly woman with nothing left except the memory of her crimes and their consequences. 2 years after the trial concluded, Gentry stood in his backyard watching Ainsley and Lyric plant a vegetable garden where beans and tomatoes would grow in neat, orderly rows during the coming summer. The girls had chosen the location carefully after studying sun patterns and soil conditions, selecting a spot with plenty of natural light and rich earth that would support healthy growth as the seasons changed. The transformation in both girls over the past year had been remarkable to witness. Ainsley had grown 4 inches and gained 30 pounds, her body finally recovering from the malnutrition and stress that had stunted her development during the imprisonment. Her hair was clean and shiny now, usually pulled back in a ponytail that swung when she laughed. Most importantly, the hollow look in her eyes had been replaced by something brighter and more hopeful. Though Gentry knew the full healing process would take many more years of therapy and patient support. The therapist says gardening helps trauma survivors feel in control of their environment, Ainsley explained as she carefully measured spacing between tomato seedlings. When you plant something and take care of it and watch it grow, it proves that good things can happen when you work hard and don't give up. Lyric had graduated valedictorian of her high school class despite the chaos and trauma of the previous 2 years, earning a full academic scholarship to Vanderbilt University, where she planned to study social work with a specialization in child protection services. Her goal was to help other children who found themselves trapped in dangerous family situations, using her own experience to recognize warning signs and provide effective intervention. I want to be the person who shows up when some kid is locked in a shed, she'd told the scholarship committee during her interview. I want to be the adult who listens and believes and takes action because I know what it feels like when nobody comes looking for you. The custody paperwork had moved through the family court system with surprising efficiency once social services documented the full extent of Savina's abuse and the girls' preference for living with their uncle. No other family members had stepped forward to challenge Gentry's petition for guardianship, and the judge had been impressed by his commitment to providing stability and support for both teenagers. Uncle Gentry, Ainsley called from across the yard, her voice carrying easily in the evening air. Can we plant strawberries over here next year? Lyric says they're easier to grow than people think. Sure, honey. Plant whatever makes you happy. The house felt full now in ways that had nothing to do with furniture or possessions. Ainsley's artwork covered the refrigerator, and Lyric's college textbooks occupied every available surface in the living room. The sounds of normal teenage life, music from bedrooms, phone conversations with friends, arguments about whose turn it was to do dishes filled spaces that had been silent for too long. Judge Hollis Claiborne had been convicted on federal corruption charges 6 months after Savina's trial, receiving a sentence of 8 years in federal prison. His judicial pension had been revoked by the state retirement system, and his name had been removed from the courthouse plaque that had honored local judges who served with distinction. The investigation into his corrupt practices had revealed a network of bribes, favors, and political payoffs that stretched back more than a decade. Marcus Webb was serving 12 years in federal prison for conspiracy, corruption, and tax evasion related to his real estate empire. His company had been dissolved to pay restitution to the dozens of people he cheated over the years, and his wife had divorced him while keeping custody of their children. Webb's downfall had been as complete and systematic as Gentry had hoped when he started building the case against Savina. The garden shed where Ainsley had been imprisoned was nothing but a memory now, reduced to ash and twisted metal in a controlled burn that Gentry had conducted 8 months after the trial. He'd soaked the wooden frame with gasoline, then stood with both girls as they watched the flames consume the structure that had represented so much pain and fear. When the fire had burned down to glowing embers, he'd taken the padlock that had kept his niece chained like an animal and thrown it into the heart of the blaze. The metal had glowed red-hot before finally melting into an unrecognizable lump that cooled into harmlessness, standing in his backyard now, watching 2 strong young women build something beautiful and hopeful from the ashes of their old life. Gentry felt a deep sense of peace that had been absent from his world for years. The systematic pursuit of justice had required patience, determination, and an unwavering commitment to truth over convenience. But seeing Ainsley laugh at something Lyric said, seeing them work together to create new life from rich soil, he knew that every difficult moment had been worthwhile. Justice wasn't just about sending criminals to prison, he'd learned. It was about creating space for healing, growth, and the possibility of happiness after trauma. It was about proving to survivors that their pain mattered, their truth was believed, and their future was worth protecting. The evening breeze carried the scent of fresh earth and growing things across the yard. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor was grilling dinner, and children were playing in a nearby park. Normal sounds of normal life in a normal world where good people outnumbered the evil ones, where justice was possible when someone cared enough to fight for it. No one cages my blood and walks away free, Gentry said quietly, the words carrying on the wind like a promise kept and a debt settled in full. The investigation was over. The trial was finished. The sentences had been served, but the healing would continue for years to come, and Gentry would be there for every step of that journey, helping 2 remarkable young women build lives worthy of their strength and courage. Some stories end with revenge. This one ended with something better. Hope, healing, and the quiet satisfaction of justice served exactly as it should be.